On Christmas Eve, my fever spiked to 105 degrees. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, cursed, "Go home to your mother's house. Don't bring your bad luck here for the whole year." My husband, Caleb, immediately packed our things and left with me. On Christmas Day, my mother-in-law frantically called me 50 times. That Christmas Eve, while the rest of the house was still busy with last-minute cleaning, shopping, and preparing the holiday feast, I found myself sitting weakly on the floor of my mother-in-law's kitchen. My body felt like it was on fire, my lips were pale and bluish, and my hands trembled so much I could no longer hold a knife to chop onions. I had a fever of 105 degrees. But what I remember most wasn't the pain, but my mother-in-law's chilling words. "Of all the times to get sick, you picked the perfect moment to collapse on Christmas Eve of all nights." My name is Eliza. At the time, I was 36 years old, working as an admin and bookkeeper for a home appliance distributor. I had been married to Caleb for 8 years. He was an HVAC technician, a quiet man who didn't say much. He wasn't uncaring, but he had one major weakness. He was too intimidated by his mother. After we married, we lived with my mother-in-law, Eleanor, and my brother-in-law, Owen, in a 3-story house in an old suburban neighborhood. Our family wasn't poor, nor were we struggling to the point of having to pinch pennies for food. But for some reason, every year as Christmas approached, I felt less like a daughter-in-law and more like an unpaid servant in my own home. Starting a week before Christmas, I barely had a moment to sit down. I'd go to the grocery store in the morning and come home in the afternoon to start cleaning the house. From scrubbing the living room and polishing the crystal figurines to washing the curtains, cleaning every window pane, changing the bed linens, and washing all the old dinnerware for the holiday meal. At night, I still had to write up shopping lists, order the ham, wrap gifts, buy flowers, choose Christmas cookies, and prepare dishes for Christmas Eve dinner and for entertaining guests over the next few days. My mother-in-law would just walk around holding a dusting cloth, but really only to give orders. She always said, "The house has to be spotless for Christmas. That's how our neighbors and guests know we're a respectable family." It sounded like it was for the family's image, but I was the only one making the house spotless. Eleanor was obsessed with appearances. When guests arrived, she loved to show off her capable daughter-in-law, her tidy kitchen, and her elaborate spread of food. But behind all the praise were nights I spent hunched over in the kitchen, my hands chapped from dish soap, my shoulders aching from lifting heavy loads. My brother-in-law, Owen, was over 30, but had no steady job. He spent his days sprawled on the sofa, scrolling on his phone or playing video games, occasionally lifting his head to criticize, "Eliza, what's taking you so long? It doesn't take all day just to arrange some cookies." Once, Caleb saw me carrying a heavy basin of washed curtains from the backyard. He rushed to help, but my mother-in-law immediately frowned. "Men shouldn't get involved in women's work. Let your wife do it. What did you marry her for?" She said it so casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I heard it with a tightness in my chest, but I remained silent. I calmed myself. It's almost Christmas, everyone's on edge. I'll just give in for a few days for the sake of peace. Sometimes, a married woman's greatest suffering isn't from working too hard, but from knowing she's being belittled, yet still having to smile to avoid being called disrespectful. On the morning of Christmas Eve, I was up before dawn. The sky was still dark. I was already in the kitchen, preparing the turkey, getting the stuffing ready, chopping vegetables, and simmering broth for the evening's meal. The night before, I had only slept a little over 3 hours because I was up late wrapping gifts for Caleb's side of the family. As I was cleaning the turkey, my vision suddenly went dark. My throat felt parched, my ears were ringing, and the hand holding the knife trembled violently. I had to lean one hand on the kitchen counter to keep from falling. I grabbed a thermometer from a drawer. The number that appeared shocked me. 104 degrees. My body was burning up, but my back felt chilled to the bone. I knew I wasn't well, but seeing the mountain of work still undone and hearing my mother-in-law's voice from the living room, "Eliza, wipe down the living room again. It still doesn't look clean." I only dared to swallow 2 fever reducers and continue working. The only thought in my mind was, just hold on a little longer. As soon as this dish is done, you can rest. But the human body is not a machine. By late morning, I could no longer stand up straight. My chest felt tight. My breathing was heavy, as if a large stone was pressing down on it. My lips were dry and cracked. My head throbbed as if hit by a hammer, and my legs were weak. I tried to reach for a glass of water but ended up dropping it on the floor. The sound of shattering glass echoed in the kitchen. I sank to the floor, leaning against a cabinet. Cold sweat soaked my clothes. Just then, Caleb came home from shopping. As soon as he entered the kitchen and saw me sitting on the floor with a pale face, he panicked, dropping his shopping bags and rushing to my side. "Eliza, what's wrong? You're burning up." He placed his hand on my forehead. His face grew anxious. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. I just pointed to the thermometer on the table. He picked it up and his voice choked. "It's 105 degrees. We have to go to the hospital now." Caleb was just about to carry me when my mother-in-law walked in from the living room. She saw the broken glass on the floor, the shopping bags Caleb had thrown, then looked at me with a gaze that showed more annoyance than concern. She frowned, her voice sharp. "It's almost Christmas. And you decide to get sick? You picked the perfect time. Collapsing on Christmas Eve. There's still so much to do. And now you're adding a trip to the hospital." I lifted my head to look at her. My throat was tight. The fever blurred my vision, but every word she spoke was crystal clear. At that moment, I didn't know that a few minutes later, those cruel words would make Caleb do something he had never dared to do in front of his mother in the 8 years we had been married. Caleb didn't answer his mother right away. He just bent down, wrapped one arm around my shoulder, and supported my back with his other hand, trying to help me stand. My body was limp. As soon as I got off the floor, my head spun, and I had to cling tightly to his shirt. I heard my mother-in-law tut behind us. So dramatic. "Who are you trying to get sympathy from? If you have a fever, take some medicine. Rest for a bit. It's Christmas. Who isn't tired?" Caleb turned around. His voice was quiet but firm. "Mom, look at Eliza's face. Her body is like fire. Her lips are so pale. How can you say she's being dramatic?" Eleanor was stunned for a moment, perhaps because Caleb had never spoken to her in that tone for years. But then she immediately scowled, adjusting the silk scarf around her neck. Her voice grew sharper. "Am I wrong? The whole house is busy preparing for Christmas. Guests will be arriving soon. If she's lying in bed, who's going to take care of everything? Are you really going to leave all the housework to take her to the hospital?" I wanted to say to Caleb, "Stop, don't argue. Just take me to our room. I'll be fine after a short rest." But my throat was dry. The only sound that came out was a series of broken gasps. Caleb didn't hesitate anymore. He grabbed a jacket, wrapped it around my body, and said to his mother, "The housework can wait. My wife has a 105-degree fever. I have to take her to get checked." With that, he helped me out the door. The nearby urgent care center was packed that day. In the final hours before Christmas, everyone seemed to be in a hurry. Some were coughing, others had fevers, children were crying, adults were sighing. I leaned on Caleb's shoulder, my eyes closed, drifting in and out of consciousness. When the nurse took my temperature, she glanced at the reading and immediately called for a doctor. The doctor checked my lungs and throat, asked when the fever started and if I had been overworking myself. Caleb stood beside me, his face turning pale when he heard me admit that I'd had a fever since morning but had forced myself to work in the kitchen until the afternoon. The doctor said in a serious tone, "A fever this high should not be taken lightly. There are signs of pneumonia, and her body is extremely exhausted. At home, she must be closely monitored, take her medication on time, and get complete rest. If the fever doesn't go down, if she has trouble breathing, or if her consciousness level drops, she must be taken to the ER immediately." He turned to Caleb and added, "Letting someone with a 105-degree fever go this long before seeking treatment is very dangerous. She could have had a seizure. The complications are no joke." Caleb looked down, his hand gripping mine tightly. I could feel his palm was wet with sweat. On the way home, Caleb didn't say much, just occasionally glanced over and asked, "Still having trouble breathing? Not too cold? Hang in there. Once we're home, I'll give you your medicine, and you can rest." His voice was full of affection and regret. Hearing it made my nose sting. I didn't know if it was the fever or if it was because, after so many years, this was the first time I felt such genuine concern from my husband. But that warmth vanished the moment we arrived home, doused with cold water. Eleanor was standing in the middle of the living room, arms crossed, her face sour. On the table, the Christmas dinner was still half finished. Beside her, Owen sat leisurely, watching videos on his phone, munching on roasted peanuts. Seeing us walk in, he only glanced over briefly before remarking, "Oh, you're back. I thought my sister-in-law would be admitted to the hospital, so she wouldn't have to cook." I was stunned. My whole body trembled. Caleb shot his brother a sharp look. "Owen, shut up." Owen shrugged with a cynical smile. "I'm just telling it like it is. The house is a mess. Mom's back is hurting. I can't cook. Eliza's timing for getting sick is just perfect. isn't it? My mother-in-law didn't scold Owen. Instead, she chimed in, "Is he wrong? If the woman of the house gets sick over every little thing, what can you rely on her for?" Caleb started to help me toward our room, but Eleanor blocked the doorway. She looked me up and down, her gaze cold as if she were inspecting damaged goods. "Let me tell you something. This house doesn't need a crybaby daughter-in-law who causes trouble over every little thing. It's bad luck to be sick right before Christmas. It's a bad omen. With a fever like that, just go home to your mother's house. Don't bring your bad luck here for the whole year." Those words stabbed straight into my chest. I had spent days preparing for Christmas for this family. I had endured the sarcastic remarks, my brother-in-law's laziness, and even my mother-in-law's unreasonable attitude, all for a peaceful celebration. But when I was sick to the point of nearly collapsing, in her eyes, I wasn't a human being in need of care, but a source of bad luck that had to be cast out. I tried to say, "Mom, I'm not pretending to be sick. The doctor said I need to rest." But she cut me off. "What doctor doesn't say that? Don't use that as an excuse to be lazy. If you want to rest, go rest at your mother's house. My house doesn't shelter people who bring bad luck on Christmas." The atmosphere in the living room became incredibly tense. I thought Caleb would fall silent again, as he usually did. But this time, he gently let go of my arm, sat me down in a chair, and stood tall to face his mother. He spoke every word clearly. "Fine. If you say Eliza has to go back to her parents' house, then I'm going with her." Eleanor's eyes widened. "What did you say?" Caleb looked at his mother, his voice not loud, but chillingly cold. "If this house considers my wife a source of bad luck, then I have no reason to celebrate Christmas here either." I stared at him through my fever, my heart pounding. Meanwhile, Eleanor stood frozen in the middle of the living room, as if she could never have imagined that her always obedient son would one day dare to defend his wife in front of her. The moment Caleb finished speaking, the entire living room fell silent. The sound of a Christmas Carol special on TV was still audible, the host's cheerful voice a stark contrast to the mood. But inside that house, the atmosphere was so cold, it was as if a poisonous wind had just passed through. I leaned back in the chair, my body still trembling, looking at my husband in disbelief that this was the same Caleb. The man who for 8 years had always chosen silence whenever his mother raised her voice, today stood tall before her and said he would leave with me. Eleanor was stunned for a few seconds. Then, as if ignited by a flame, she approached and pointed a finger at her son's face. "Are you out of your mind, Caleb? You'd leave your own mother on Christmas Eve for a woman? I raised you so you could worship your wife and let her turn you against me?" Her voice was shrill, filled with rage and disbelief. The way she referred to me as a woman made my heart ache, but I was too exhausted to react. Caleb didn't argue. He just looked at his mother for a long time, his gaze full of hurt and coldness. Then he turned to me, bending down to help me stand. "Go to the room first. I'll pack our things, then we're leaving." Weakly, I held his hand. My voice was hoarse. "Honey, don't let this become a huge fight on Christmas because of me. I'll rest for a bit. We can figure it out tomorrow." I said that not because my feelings weren't hurt, but because years of being a daughter-in-law had conditioned me to be afraid. Afraid of being accused of driving a wedge between a mother and son. Afraid of becoming neighborhood gossip. Afraid of a huge family fight before Christmas Day had even arrived. Caleb looked at me, his eyes red. He brushed away a few strands of hair damp with sweat from my forehead. His voice softened. "I've been silent for too long. If I still let you be humiliated like this today, I don't deserve to be your husband." That sentence was like a stone thrown into the frozen lake of my heart. I couldn't cry because I was too tired, but my eyes stung. It turned out he wasn't oblivious. It turned out he had seen all the bitterness I had swallowed all these years. He had just taken too long to finally act. He helped me to our room, sat me on the bed, and then started opening the closet. The sound of the sliding closet door, the clatter of hangers, and the pulling of drawers were clear amidst the cursing from outside the room. Caleb grabbed a few sets of my clothes, a thick jacket, a scarf, the medicine the doctor had just prescribed, my medical records, and my ID. He also took my phone charger, a backup box of fever reducers, and a bottle of menthol oil I usually kept in the drawer. All his movements were quick but not rushed. The more I watched, the more I understood that this wasn't a momentary burst of anger. He had truly made up his mind. In the living room, Eleanor was still shouting, "If you step out of this house, don't blame me if I don't consider you my son anymore. Leaving on Christmas to follow your wife. How am I supposed to show my face around here?" Owen chimed in, his voice lazy but full of provocation. "Think carefully, Caleb. If you leave, don't expect to come back begging for food. This house isn't short of people. Caleb heard everything but didn't respond immediately. He zipped up the suitcase, helped me stand, and only then did he step out. Eleanor blocked the main door, her arms outstretched as if to bar our way. Her face was red with anger. This house isn't a marketplace. You can't just come and go as you please. Where are the car keys? The house keys? Where are you taking things from this house? Caleb put down the suitcase, took the house key from his pocket, and placed it on the table. The sound of metal hitting glass was dry. He said, "I'm only taking our personal belongings and taking my wife to get treatment. I'm leaving the house key here." Eleanor gritted her teeth. "I can't believe she's put a spell on you. I just said a few words and you act like she's been tortured." At that moment, Caleb looked at his mother. His voice was quiet, but every word was very clear. "Mom, don't call cruelty a family tradition. She has a 105-degree fever. The doctor said it's dangerous, but all you care about is the Christmas dinner and what people will say. I'd rather leave with nothing than let my wife be treated like a source of bad luck in this house." Owen laughed cynically, tossing peanut shells into an ashtray. "You talk a big game, Caleb. Your wife is as precious as gold, while your mother and I are nothing. When you have no money and no place to live, don't come crawling back here complaining." Caleb turned to look at his brother. The look in his eyes at that moment silenced Owen. Caleb said quietly, "I won't ask anyone for food. I'm just afraid that one day, you'll be the one begging for your debts to be forgiven." As soon as that sentence was spoken, Owen's face changed instantly. He looked down at his phone, pretending not to hear, but I clearly saw his hand tremble slightly. As Caleb helped me to the car, the evening air at the end of Christmas Eve felt cold on my face. In the small lane, some houses had already put up twinkling lights. The faint smell of roasting turkey wafted through the air. People were preparing to welcome Christmas. Meanwhile, we were leaving my in-laws' house with a single suitcase and my body hot with fever. Eleanor was still standing at the gate, shouting, "Go, just go so I don't have to see you again. Don't expect to come back on Christmas Day or the day after, begging for forgiveness." I leaned back in the passenger seat, my head spinning, my eyes half closed. Caleb fastened my seatbelt, pulled my jacket tighter around my neck, and then started the engine. As soon as the car started moving, he immediately called my mother. His voice was hoarse. "Mom, Caleb is bringing Eliza home. Eliza has a very high fever. The doctor said she needs to be monitored closely. Please get some things ready. If her fever doesn't go down, I'm taking her straight to the hospital." On the other end of the line, I faintly heard my mother's panicked voice, but I wasn't strong enough to hear it clearly. Through the rearview mirror, I saw Eleanor's shadow still standing in front of the gate. Her figure grew smaller and smaller in the twilight haze. At that moment, she and Owen probably thought we were just angry and would be back in a few days. No one knew that on that Christmas Eve afternoon, when she threw me out with the most hurtful words, she had also pushed Caleb out of her circle of control. And no one suspected that in just a few days, the house she so fiercely defended with her pride would be blown apart by a secret that had been rotting for a long time. The moment the car stopped in front of my mother's house, I could no longer distinguish between the sound of the car engine and the sound of my own heartbeat. My eyes felt heavy, my throat was as dry as a desert, and every breath was painful in my chest. When Caleb opened the car door, I immediately slumped toward him. He panicked and shouted, "Eliza, stay with me, we're at your mom's house." But I only heard his voice growing more distant, as if coming from the bottom of deep water. My mother, Carol, ran out of the house as soon as she heard the car. She was still wearing an apron, her hands covered in cookie dough from preparing the last batch of Christmas cookies. The moment she saw me being carried by Caleb, her face turned deathly pale. "Oh my God, what's wrong with my child?" She immediately touched my forehead, then jerked her hand back as if she had touched a hot coal. My body was hot, but my hands and feet were cold, my lips dry and pale. Caleb didn't hide anything. As he helped me inside, he spoke quickly in a hoarse voice. "Mom, Eliza has a 105-degree fever. I took her to urgent care. The doctor said there are signs of pneumonia and she needs to be watched." Over at their house, Caleb's mother threw Eliza out, said she was bringing bad luck on Christmas. Hearing the last sentence, Caleb's voice broke. My mother stood silent, her eyes immediately turning red. I knew my mother's nature. She was usually patient and rarely raised her voice. But when it came to her children, she would not stay silent. With a trembling voice, she asked, "My daughter is this sick? And they had the nerve to say that?" Caleb looked down, not daring to meet his mother-in-law's eyes. "It's my fault, Mom. I let this go on for too long." My mother wrung the cloth in her hands. Her eyes looked at Caleb with a mixture of anger and disappointment, but she didn't blame him further. She just rushed into the house to grab my jacket, wallet, and ID, then said curtly, "We'll talk about right and wrong later. Take her to the hospital first. My daughter's life is more important than any argument." That sentence, even in my semi-conscious state, made my nose sting. All day at my in-laws' house, I was treated as a source of bad luck to be discarded. But the moment I arrived at my mother's house, the first thing she thought of wasn't pride or who was at fault, but her daughter's life. Perhaps in this world, where there is a mother, that is where home truly is. At the hospital, I was immediately re-examined. The white lights in the corridor flashed before my eyes. The smell of antiseptic stung my nose. The sound of the gurney wheels was cold and rhythmic. The doctor took my temperature, checked my lungs, and monitored my vital signs, then decided to admit me. He told Caleb and my mother, "A 105-degree fever can't be taken lightly. The patient is showing signs of a respiratory infection and acute exhaustion. If she had continued to work or been cared for at home, the risk of seizures and respiratory failure would have been very high." Caleb stood silently beside the hospital bed, his shoulders slumped. After the nurse finished setting up the IV and my mother left to buy some soup, he finally sat beside me. He held my hand so gently, as if afraid of hurting me. He stared at the IV needle in the back of my hand, his eyes red. "Eliza, forgive me. I thought that by giving in to my mother, the house would be peaceful. I thought that as long as I didn't talk back, everything would be fine. It turns out you were the one suffering the most." I was too tired to speak. I could only look at him. Caleb looked down for a long time before continuing in a low voice. "There are a lot of things I've hidden from you. Not because I wanted to lie to you, but because I was a coward. I was afraid that if you knew, you would be disappointed and our home would become even more complicated." Hearing that, my heart sank. I had a feeling that what he was about to say wasn't just about a harsh mother-in-law or a lazy brother-in-law. He told me that for the past few years, Eleanor had often borrowed money from him. At first, the reasons were to fix the roof, pay unexpected medical bills, or cover property taxes she claimed she was short on. Caleb felt sorry for his mother, so he gave it to her, sometimes a few $1,000s, sometimes tens of thousands. But then he discovered that most of the money wasn't used for household needs but was given to Owen. The brother-in-law I thought was just lazy and playful was actually deep in debt. I managed to ask in a hoarse voice, "How much money?" Caleb closed his eyes. When I found out it was over $10,000, Mom asked me to keep quiet. She said not to make a scene before Christmas, that she would handle it. But a few months later, the debt grew. Once, strangers came to the house looking for Owen. They spoke harshly at the front gate. Mom was afraid the neighbors would find out, so she pulled me into her room and forced me to transfer the money right then and there. I lay there silently. Every word from Caleb seemed to peel back another layer of the house I had lived in for 8 years. It turned out that behind the image of a respectable family maintained with such pride, there was a pit of debt that was secretly growing larger every day. Caleb continued his story, telling me that Eleanor had once taken money from our joint savings account under the pretext of needing to renovate the family room before Christmas. I had wondered why the money disappeared so quickly, but when I asked, Caleb just said his mom had an urgent need. Now I understood. That money was also used to cover Owen's debts. "I'm sorry for hiding it from you," he said in a hoarse voice. "I thought I could handle it myself, but the more I hid it, the heavier the problem became." Leading up to Christmas this year, Owen borrowed an even larger sum. Mom forced me to celebrate Christmas at home by any means necessary, not just because she wanted the family together. She was afraid the debt collectors would come, afraid relatives would find out, and afraid I wouldn't be there to protect her. I turned my face to the window. Outside, the street was bright with lights. Christmas Eve was supposed to be a time for people to gather around a holiday meal or listen to carols. Meanwhile, I was lying here with an IV in my hand, sick with a fever, and sick from the realization that I had been unknowingly entangled in a family full of secrets. My mother-in-law's words, "Don't bring your bad luck here," echoed in my mind. She wasn't really afraid I would bring bad luck. Maybe she was just afraid I would be lying there, weak but aware, and see everything she was trying to cover up. Just then, Caleb's phone, which was on the table, vibrated continuously. The screen lit up and went dark repeatedly. His mother's name appeared a dozen times. Caleb stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. I thought he would answer it, but he just silently declined the call, turned his phone over, and then covered me with a blanket. "Get some sleep," he said softly. "From now on, I'll handle things over there. No one is allowed to disturb you tonight." I closed my eyes, listening to the regular dripping of the IV beside my ear. But in my heart, I knew that the silence from the phone wasn't the end, but a brief pause before the real storm arrived. On Christmas morning, I woke up to the lingering sound of fireworks from the night before outside the window. The first rays of holiday sunlight streamed through the thin curtains, falling on the back of my hand, which was still bandaged from the IV. My body wasn't as hot as yesterday, my head was no longer spinning, but my whole body still felt weak. The first thing I saw was Caleb asleep at the edge of the bed, still wearing the same jacket. It seemed he had been up all night. As soon as I moved slightly, he woke up immediately. His eyes were red, but his voice was gentle. "You're awake. Still having trouble breathing? I bought some oatmeal. Let me help you sit up to eat and take your medicine." He opened a container of warm oatmeal. The aroma of cinnamon and apples filled the medicine-scented room. I wanted to eat by myself, but my hand was still weak and trembling. Caleb didn't say anything, just patiently blew on each spoonful of oatmeal before feeding it to me. In 8 years of being a daughter-in-law, I had fed my mother-in-law when she had a toothache, made soup for Owen after he was drunk, and taken care of Caleb when he came home from work with a fever. But I don't think anyone had ever sat beside me and patiently blown on my food like this. As the warm oatmeal went down my throat, my eyes stung. Not out of sadness, but because it was only then, lying in a hospital bed on Christmas morning, that I understood what it felt like to have my health prioritized over a fancy meal, pride, and what other people thought. My mother came in shortly after, carrying a bag of oranges and a thermos of warm water. She saw Caleb feeding me. Her gaze softened slightly but still felt heavy. She sat down, not scolding Caleb or bringing up the cruel words from his family. She just said quietly, "Better late than never, Caleb. But from now on, if you want to be a husband, you have to be able to protect your wife. Don't wait until she's lying here like this for you to feel guilty." Caleb put down the spoon and looked down for a long time. "I'm sorry, Mom. From now on, I'll be responsible for my choices. I won't let Eliza live like this anymore." I looked at my mother, then at my husband. The small hospital room held just the three of us. There were no new clothes, no elaborate feast, no boisterous holiday greetings. Strangely, this was the warmest Christmas morning I had felt in years. My mother peeled an orange, Caleb poured water, and I sat up, watching them both take care of me. This Christmas wasn't perfect like people say it should be, but there was sincere love, not love that had to be paid for with suffering. While the atmosphere at my parents' house was calm, things at my in-laws' house were beginning to unravel. I heard about it later from Caleb and a few close relatives. On that Christmas morning, Eleanor woke up later than usual, having been angry all night and unable to sleep. When she went down to the kitchen, she saw everything was a mess. The vegetables hadn't been prepped, the pot of broth was only half-cooked, the ham wasn't glazed, and the Christmas cookies were still lying in their plastic containers. The work that I quietly finished every year, starting before dawn, now appeared as a mountain of chaos before her eyes. Relatives began to arrive to exchange holiday greetings. Eleanor, who was used to showing off her tidy house and abundant food, could only offer a simple plate of fruit that day. The living room was still dusty, and the kitchen smelled of old oil mixed with cold food. Someone asked, "Where's Eliza, Eleanor?" "She's usually the most efficient one." Eleanor smiled stiffly, adjusting her dress. "She's sick, so I told her to go to her parents' house to rest. You have to be kind to your daughter-in-law, you know." The words sounded nice, but those who knew her character understood she was just saving face. Unfortunately, Owen couldn't keep his mouth shut. On Christmas afternoon, after a few glasses of punch, Owen leaned back in his chair and laughed. In front of several relatives, he blurted out, "Sick? Mom kicked Eliza out. Said she was bringing bad luck on Christmas." Instantly, the atmosphere at the dining table became awkward. An aunt from the family put down her fork, looking at Eleanor with a strange expression. Some people pretended to cough, others exchanged glances. No one said anything directly, but the gossip had already started to spread like oil on water. Eleanor's face turned red. She snapped at Owen to be quiet, but the words were already out. The pride she had guarded for years was torn apart by her own favorite son, right on Christmas Day. Towards the evening, while some guests were still there, two strange men suddenly appeared at the front gate. They were dressed in plain clothes, not loud, but their faces were cold. They walked in as if they already knew their way around the house. One of them looked around and asked, "Is Owen home?" Eleanor immediately became wary, trying to smile. "Are you looking for Owen? What can I help you with? It's Christmas today. He's out visiting friends." The taller man pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and placed it on the table. His voice was flat. He promised to pay at the end of the month, but he disappeared. That's not how it works. We're not here for Christmas. We're here to collect a debt. The lively atmosphere in the living room suddenly went cold. Eleanor quickly tried to grab the paper to hide it, but the other man said, in a voice loud enough for the relatives to hear, "The loan agreement with Owen's signature is right here. And this sentence, please read it carefully, ma'am." With trembling hands, Eleanor opened the paper. Her eyes fixated on a note at the bottom. Her face, which had been red with shame and anger, now turned deathly pale. It was clearly written there. If the payment was past due, the collateral to be seized was the house she was currently living in. According to a verbal agreement and confirmation from the borrower, she froze. All this time, Owen had only said he was borrowing a little money for a business venture. He never mentioned using the house as collateral. The relatives sitting around her held their breath. The strange man tapped his fingers on the table, his voice still cold. "Please call him home. Don't make us come back tomorrow." On Christmas night, Caleb's phone started vibrating nonstop. One call, two calls, then dozens of calls from his mother. But he saw me sleeping after taking my medicine and still didn't answer. He just took his phone into the hallway, silenced it, and then stood there thinking for a very long time. He probably suspected there was trouble at home, but this time he didn't immediately rush back to fix it like he usually did. On the morning of the day after Christmas, as soon as I opened my eyes, my phone and Caleb's phone lit up almost simultaneously. Eleanor's name appeared over and over. 10 missed calls, 20, then nearly 50 missed calls in just one morning. I stared at the phone screen. A strange feeling washed over me. It wasn't fear like before, but a premonition that the real storm had begun to hit the house I had just left. I stared at the phone screen, which kept lighting up and turning off. My feelings were hard to describe. Outside in the hospital corridor, people walked by calmly, wishing each other a Merry Christmas. But in my small room, the incessant ringing of the phone made the atmosphere suffocating. Nearly 50 missed calls from Eleanor. A person who, her entire life, considered her pride more important than anything else. If she wasn't desperate, it would be impossible for her to lower herself to call me that many times. Caleb stood by the window, holding his own phone, which also displayed dozens of missed calls from his mother. He looked at it for a moment, then turned off the screen. His voice was quiet. "It must be another problem with Owen." I leaned back on the pillows. My body was still weak, but my mind was clearer. I said softly, "If it were just about debt collectors, she would have called last night. To call frantically like this since this morning, I'm afraid the problem is bigger." Caleb didn't have a chance to answer when his phone rang again. This time, it wasn't my mother-in-law, but Aunt Linda, a relative from his side of the family whom I met occasionally at family events. Caleb looked at the caller's name, frowning slightly, then answered. As soon as the phone was to his ear, his expression changed instantly. On the other end, Aunt Linda's voice sounded panicked. "Caleb, where are you? There's big trouble at your house. The police have been here since early this morning. They took Owen to the station." I heard the word police, and a chill ran down my spine. Caleb immediately stood up, asking quickly, "Aunt Linda, please explain. What about Owen? Why did the police come to the house?" Aunt Linda spoke rapidly, the sound of commotion in the background mixing with her voice, filled with whispers and crying. "Last night, some people came to collect a debt. At first, it was just an argument at the gate, but then they came into the living room. Your mother was afraid the neighbors would hear, so she closed the door. Turns out, things got more heated." Caleb gripped his phone tightly. I saw his knuckles turn white. Aunt Linda continued that among the debt collectors was a man who had been scammed while buying a used car a few months ago. The man immediately recognized Owen. It turned out Owen had taken down payments from many people for car purchases, with promises of cheap cars and complete paperwork. But after receiving the money, he kept delaying the car delivery with various excuses, like the car being stuck in a warehouse or the papers not being ready, and then slowly disappeared. People thought he had just run off from his debts. Aunt Linda's voice choked. No one expected that last night they would realize Owen was part of a used car scam ring. They immediately called their other friends. Someone reported him to the police that same night. This morning, the police came with a warrant for him. The house is in chaos. I lay in the hospital bed, my heart pounding. Caleb's story last night about Owen's debt was just the tip of the iceberg. Behind it was a much bigger problem. I looked at my husband. His face was ashen. Even though he was disappointed in his brother, He probably never imagined Owen could be involved in a fraud case. Caleb asked quietly, as if still hoping for a mistake. Could they have the wrong person, Aunt Linda? On the other end of the line, there was a moment of silence. Then Aunt Linda replied, I wish that were the case too. But the police brought an official warrant, complete with reports from the victims. They mentioned his name, phone number, and even the bank account number that received the money. Owen couldn't even stand up straight. His face was so pale. Your mother was crying hysterically, kept screaming that her son was framed. Caleb closed his eyes. I knew he was hurting. One could be angry, disappointed, or hate a brother, but to hear his brother was taken by the police on the day after Christmas, his heart must have been shattered. He asked again. Before he left, what did Owen say? Aunt Linda sighed, her voice sounding tired. He was yelling. He said, Mom has to call you to save him. If not, the whole family will be ruined. He also said, you're the only one with money, with a house, who can solve this problem. That last sentence made both Caleb and me fall silent. The word save in Owen's mouth wasn't about helping a guilty person face the truth. It was about saving him with money, with a house, with someone else's sacrifice. Just like before, only this time the hole was too deep, no longer coverable with tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. Caleb ended the call and stood silently by the window for a long time. Outside, the sunlight of the day after Christmas felt warm yet cold. I looked at his back, saw his tense shoulders as if carrying a heavy burden. I knew that even though he had just left that house with me, his mother and brother were still there. One can't just turn away as if they were strangers. I called him softly, Caleb. He turned around. His eyes were red, but he tried to remain calm. I said quietly, go home. See what the situation is. But you have to remember, go home to understand the problem and solve it correctly, not to bear someone else's mistakes. Caleb walked to the side of the bed, holding my hand. You're still sick. I don't want to leave you alone. I shook my head. My mom is here. Besides, if you don't go home, things there will only get more chaotic. But you have to promise me one thing. He looked at me. I spoke every word clearly. Don't sign anything. Don't transfer money to anyone. Don't listen to pleas for pity for your mother or brother and rashly sell the house or go into debt. This is a legal matter. Let the law handle it. Caleb looked down for a long time, then nodded. I promise. But as soon as he finished speaking, my phone vibrated again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. It was just one line. You're Caleb's wife, right? If you don't want your husband's family to be completely destroyed, don't let him go home alone. I stared at the message. A shiver went down my spine. Caleb read it too. No one spoke, but we both understood that Owen's problem was no longer just a simple debt collection case. Behind Eleanor's panicked calls and Owen's cries for help, there was probably a bigger secret waiting to be revealed on the second day after Christmas that year. The storm I had sensed was coming had finally truly arrived at that house. I reread the message from the unknown number. Don't let him go home alone. Just a few short words, but they made the already cold hospital room feel even colder. Caleb stood beside me, his eyes fixed on the phone screen, his face tense. I knew he was torn. On one hand, there was me, still weak from a high fever. On the other, his mother who had called nearly 50 times and his brother who had been taken by the police. His entire family was in chaos on the day after Christmas. Finally, he said, I'm going home, but you stay here with your mom, you haven't recovered. I looked at him and shook my head. No, I'm coming with you. Caleb frowned, about to refuse, but I held his wrist. I'm not going back to argue. I'm going back to see for myself what's really happening. Besides, the person who sent that message said not to let you go home alone. I won't be at peace letting you go there by yourself. He looked at me for a long time, his gaze full of worry and helplessness. Finally, he just sighed. All right, I'll ask the doctor for permission for you to leave for a few hours. But if you feel tired, we're coming straight back. My mother, of course, was not happy. As she helped me put on my jacket, she said to Caleb, I'm letting my daughter go with you, not to hear another harsh word. If anything happens, you're the one who has to step up. Don't let her become a shield. Caleb looked down. I understand, Mom. I will protect Eliza. My mother looked at him, her voice softening but still firm. Protecting her isn't just about talk. When your family is in the wrong, you have to have the courage to say it's wrong. On the way back to my in-laws' house, the streets were still busy. Along the road, festive decorations, Christmas trees, and red lights were still up. Children in new clothes ran after their parents who were visiting relatives. But inside the car, no one spoke much. Caleb drove slowly, occasionally glancing at me. I leaned against the window, my body still tired, but my mind felt crystal clear. I was no longer the frightened daughter-in-law who was thrown out of the house on Christmas Eve. I was returning to that place with a different feeling, wary, but also wanting to see how deep the hole that secretly existed in that family was. As soon as the car stopped in front of the gate, I saw the house that was usually filled with the sound of Christmas music was now silent. The gate was not fully closed. In the yard, a few pairs of sandals were scattered about, and some relatives stood clustered on the porch, whispering. Eleanor was slumped on the floor, her hair disheveled. The maroon dress she had been wearing since morning was wrinkled. Her face seemed to have aged 10 years overnight. Seeing Caleb walk in, she immediately stood up and rushed towards him, no longer with her usual arrogant demeanor and high-pitched voice. She grabbed Caleb's hand and suddenly knelt in the middle of the yard. All the relatives were shocked. I too was stunned. The woman who had once pointed at my face, cursed me as a source of bad luck, and told me to go back to my parents' house was now kneeling before her own son, crying until her voice was hoarse. "Caleb, please save your brother. I'm begging you. You're the only one who can save him." Caleb panicked and tried to lift his mother. "Mom, stand up first. What's wrong? Explain it clearly." But she kept holding Caleb's hand tightly, tears and snot covering her face. "He's still young. He made a mistake. As his older brother, if you don't help him, who will? I can only count on you." Caleb gritted his teeth, his voice choked. "Mom, you have to be honest. What did Owen really do? How much is his debt? Who is he involved with?" Eleanor kept evading, repeating that Owen had just fallen in with a bad crowd, was just messing around, and was being framed. But this time, Caleb was no longer easily swayed. He led his mother to a seat in the living room and said very quietly, "If you hide even one more thing, I'm leaving right now. If you want my help, from now on, you have to be honest." That sentence seemed to snap the last thread she was using to cover the truth. Trembling, she pulled out a stack of papers from a drawer. There were loan agreements, proof of transfers, receipts for car down payments, and a list of recipients all connected to Owen. I saw the numbers on the papers, and a chill ran down my back. $5,000, $20,000, $10,000. There was even one for $30,000. It wasn't just one or two people, but many different names. An uncle standing nearby sighed. "Caleb, the police said the rough estimate is already over $150,000. Owen took down payments for used cars from many people. He promised cheap cars with complete papers. At first, he delivered one or two cars to build trust. But after that, he collected money from many people and then disappeared." The receiving bank account was traced to his name. Caleb stood frozen. He turned to his mother, his voice hoarse. "You told me his debt was only a few $1,000s because his business failed." Eleanor covered her face and sobbed. "It was like that at first. Then he said he just needed a little more capital to turn the money around and cover his losses. I believed him. He said if he didn't pay soon, he'd be beaten up. He'd be shamed on social media. I was so scared." I looked at her, my heart no longer angry like it was on Christmas Eve. My feeling turned into a deeper cold. Her fear of losing face had nurtured Owen's mistakes little by little. Caleb asked again, each word seeming to fall to the floor. "Where did all that money go?" No one answered. After a moment, a cousin said quietly, "The police said Owen admitted he initially used it for sports betting. After losing a lot, he switched to crypto investments, joining groups on the internet, hoping to cover his losses. The more he tried, the more he lost." The living room was silent. The Christmas dishes were still on the table, but no one touched them. Caleb took a step back, his hands gripping the edge of a chair. The brother he had always thought was just lazy and playful had dragged the entire family into a chasm deeper than anyone could have imagined. Just then, Eleanor suddenly lifted her head, her voice trembling. "I already sold it." Caleb frowned. "Sold what?" she wailed. "The lake cabin your grandparents left us upstate. I sold it secretly a few months ago to pay his debts. I thought it would be over after that, but it turns out there were still so many other debts." Hearing that, my entire body felt cold. That inherited land had once been described by Eleanor as the most sacred thing for the family. She had once scolded me just for idly suggesting we rent it out for a while to get extra money for home renovations. But for Owen, she sold it secretly without telling anyone. Caleb stared at his mother, his lips moving, but no sound coming out. On his face at that moment was not just anger, but the pain of a son who had just realized his mother had gone too far to cover up the mistakes of her other child. And I, standing behind him, had to hold onto a chair to keep my balance. The fever that hadn't completely subsided made my head a little dizzy, but everything before my eyes was so clear and cruel. It turned out the Christmas that Eleanor had tried so hard to make look beautiful in the eyes of relatives had been rotting from the inside for a long time. And those 50 phone calls on the morning of the day after Christmas weren't because she missed her son, let alone regretted kicking me out. They were cries for help from someone who had just realized that the hole she dug to cover her youngest son's mistakes had finally collapsed right under the feet of the entire family. No one in the living room could say a word after Eleanor's confession. The inherited land was sold, the money gone. With Owen taken by the police, the Christmas she had always tried to paint with lavish dishes and praise in front of relatives had left only sighs and a pile of debt letters on the table. Caleb stood silently, staring at the stack of documents as if gazing into a bottomless abyss. I sat in a chair near the door, trying to catch my breath. The lingering fever made my body feel hot and cold. But what made me shiver the most at that moment was not my illness, but my mother-in-law's gaze. After a few minutes of crying, she suddenly looked at Caleb with a very different expression. It was no longer ordinary panic, but the look of someone who had found their last life raft and was determined to cling to it by any means necessary. She slowly stood up, wiping her tears with her sleeve. Her voice was hoarse. "Caleb, I know you're angry. I know I was wrong to hide it from you, but now is not the time for blame. Your brother is in their hands. If there's no money to cover the losses, his life will be ruined." Caleb looked at his mother without answering. She came closer, her voice softening as if pleading. "Sell your house. We'll save Owen first. A lost house can be earned back. If your brother goes to prison, his future is over." Instantly, the living room fell silent. An aunt standing near the family room mumbled, "Eleanor," then fell quiet. Perhaps even she couldn't believe my mother-in-law could make such a request right in front of me, the person she had thrown out just 2 days ago while I had a high fever. I looked at Eleanor. My heart was frozen solid. The house she mentioned wasn't some negotiable item. It was a place we had paid for, little by little, with a mortgage. The result of saving every dollar, working overtime on weekends, and sacrificing many vacation plans. Caleb was still silent. Eleanor, thinking he was wavering, pressed him again. "You're the eldest son. Your father is gone. This family depends on you. Owen made a mistake, but family is family. Just sell the house. Pay off a portion first. We'll ask for more time for the rest. You two are still young, still strong. You can earn it back later. Save your brother first." Every word of "earn it back later" sounded like a stone in my ears. I remembered for years, every time I wanted to buy something for myself, my mother-in-law would call me wasteful. Every time I talked about renovating our small apartment, she would say her family's needs came first. But now, our biggest asset, she was so easily telling us to sell, all because of Owen's actions. I didn't speak. I wanted to hear Caleb's answer. There are boundaries that, if not guarded by the husband himself, no matter how much the wife speaks, she will only be seen as selfish. Suddenly, Caleb let out a soft laugh. Not a happy laugh, but one so painful it silenced the entire room. He lifted his head to look at his mother. His eyes were red, but his voice was clearer than before. "You say a lost house can be earned back. Then why didn't you say a single word to me when you sold the family land? Why, when Owen was constantly getting into debt, didn't you tell him to stop? Why is it only now, when everything can no longer be hidden, that you remember I'm the eldest son?" Eleanor was stunned, her lips trembling. I felt sorry for your brother." Caleb stepped to the table and slammed his hand on it. The sound startled some of the relatives. "You felt sorry for your brother, so you sacrificed our lives to cover his mistakes? Do you have any idea that on Christmas Eve, you threw Eliza out of the house when she had a 105-degree fever? At that moment, were you thinking of me? Did you think about what would have happened to my life if something had happened to her on the road?" Eleanor was speechless. I saw her hands shaking. Caleb didn't stop. All the silence he had suppressed for years seemed to break at that moment. "You said Eliza brought bad luck, but the one who made this house like this isn't Eliza. It was Owen who was wrong, and you who knew he was wrong but kept covering for him. Now that he's caused trouble, you're telling us to sell our house to bear the consequences. Is that what you call family love?" An uncle sitting in the corner sighed. "Caleb is right, Eleanor. There's a way to help people. You can't pull one person who intentionally jumped into a ravine by pushing another family into it. Eleanor turned sharply, her eyes full of anger. But in front of so many people, she had run out of excuses to argue. The silence of the relatives was no longer on her side. It was the silence of people who had seen everything clearly. She turned to me, her voice starting to sharpen. Eliza, you say something. You're his wife. Don't you feel sorry for your brother-in-law? Are you happy to see your husband's family fall apart like this? If that question had been thrown at me a few days ago, it might have made me tremble and rush to defend myself. But that day, I just placed a hand on my chest, took a slow breath, and replied, I don't want my husband's family to be destroyed, Mom. But I also can't let our house be sold to pay for mistakes we didn't make. I looked her straight in the eye. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear enough for everyone to hear. If Owen needs a lawyer, needs support when dealing with the authorities, we can discuss it. If you need a ride to meet the victims and find a legal solution, I won't stop Caleb. But selling our house, going into more debt, or signing any papers to cover Owen's debts, that will not happen. Caleb immediately stood beside me, as if to affirm his choice. He said, Eliza's decision is my decision too. Eleanor looked at us both, her gaze shifting from pleading to one filled with hatred. But this time, Caleb didn't back down. He took the stack of debt letters from the table, neatened them, and said, From now on, everything has to be clear. Which debts are legitimate, where the responsibility lies, let the lawyers and the authorities handle it. I will not abandon you, Mom, but I will also not let you use the word duty to force me to make a mistake. That sentence fell into the messy living room on Christmas like a knife cutting the strings of manipulation that had been pulled for years. Eleanor sank weakly into her chair, her face pale. For the first time, she was out of words to scold me. And I, in my exhaustion, felt a small sense of relief. Not because the problem was over, but because Caleb was finally standing where he should have been by his wife's side, yet wise enough not to repay his mother's cruelty with his own. Eleanor sat limply in the chair for a short while, but her gaze shifted again. Perhaps when she realized she couldn't force Caleb to sell the house, couldn't use the word duty to make him bear Owen's debts, she began to look for another target for her desperation. And that target, as it had been for years, was me. She lifted her head, her red eyes staring at me sharply. It was as if all the debt letters, all the scam victims, all of Owen's mistakes, and all her cover-ups could be rolled into one and dumped on the head of a daughter-in-law who was just recovering from a fever. She pointed straight at my face, her voice hoarse but filled with hatred. This is all your fault for coming into this house. My family was fine before. Ever since you showed up, there's always been a problem. You really are a woman who brings bad luck. Instantly, the entire living room fell silent. Caleb took a step forward, but I held his hand. I wanted to hear it all. There are words that, if not allowed to come out, other people will never understand why a daughter-in-law could be so hurt that she had to leave the home she once tried to build. Seeing me stay silent, Eleanor grew bolder. She stood up, crying and shouting, her voice echoing throughout the room. If you hadn't pretended to be sick on Christmas Eve, if you hadn't taken Caleb away from the house, he would have been here on Christmas Day. When the debt collectors came, someone would have been here to face them. When the police came, someone would have been here to handle it. This is all because you took your husband away, leaving us alone. And now you dare to stand there as if you're innocent. At that point, she turned to the relatives as if seeking support. Look, everyone, what kind of daughter-in-law sees her husband's family in trouble and just stands there silently? She wants my family to be ruined. Some relatives who didn't understand the full story began to whisper. One said, no matter what, this is her husband's family's problem. For them to leave at a time like this is not right. Another sighed. Sometimes, a woman should be a little more flexible. If you're too rigid, this is what happens. I heard every word clearly, but strangely, my heart no longer trembled as it used to. Perhaps when a person has been pushed to their lowest point, they learn to remain calm amidst the noise. Caleb couldn't take it anymore. He turned to those who had just spoken, his voice heavy. My wife had a 105-degree fever. The doctor said it could be life-threatening. My mother threw her out because she was considered bad luck. I took her to the hospital. Was that wrong? The room fell silent again, but Eleanor didn't stop. She slammed the table, tears streaming down her face, but her words were as sharp as a knife. You know what? Ever since you married her, you've changed completely. You used to love your mother, love your brother. Now, your wife says one word, and you immediately turn your back on your own flesh and blood. If she's not the one bringing bad luck, then what is she? I looked at her, suddenly feeling a mix of pity and amusement. A mother who, by loving one child the wrong way, covering up his mistakes time and again, ended up calling her other son's awakening the result of his wife's instigation. I didn't answer immediately. Slowly, I took my phone out of my pocket. My hand was still trembling slightly from my weakness, but my mind was very clear. I opened my voice recordings folder, looking for a file I had saved a few months ago. I hadn't intentionally recorded it to trap Owen. At the time, he was drunk in the backyard, talking on the phone and laughing loudly. I happened to overhear and felt uneasy, so I turned on the voice recorder. I placed the phone on the table and pressed play. At first, there was only the sound of wind and clinking glasses, then Owen's drunken voice came through very clearly. These people are so easy to fool. Just say they are impounded cars, pay the down payment to secure the unit. They all fall for the cheap price. Some even thank me. Just wait for one more batch, and I can make back all my losses. Another man's voice on the recording asked, "What if they come asking for their money?" Owen laughed cynically. "What's there to be afraid of? At worst, my mom will clean it up. She won't let anything happen to me. Caleb also has a house, has money, he'll definitely step in." Instantly, the living room fell dead silent. No one was whispering anymore. Those who had just advised me to be more flexible now bowed their heads. Eleanor stood frozen, her face ashen. That was her son's voice. There was no mistaking it. The voice of a drunk, arrogant, irresponsible man, but sober enough to calculate that his mother would protect him and his brother would bear the burden. I looked at her honestly without any sense of satisfaction. I just felt a chill run down my spine. Someone who does wrong but knows there's always a way out will never stop on their own. The recording continued. Owen added, "In this house, my mom is in charge. My sister-in-law is only good in the kitchen. What does she know about money? If anything happens, my mom will do the talking. Caleb will melt right away." Hearing that, Caleb closed his eyes. I knew that sentence cut him deeply. It not only exposed Owen's true nature, but also Caleb's own weakness that had been exploited by others for so long. I pressed the stop button. The small click sounded like a final gavel in the middle of the room. I lifted my head, looked at everyone, and then said quietly, "I'm not playing this recording to condemn Owen. I'm playing it so everyone understands that this problem didn't start on Christmas Eve, nor did it start when we left the house. This problem started a long time ago, ever since someone did something wrong and the whole family took turns protecting him." Eleanor trembled. "When did you record that? You were spying on your own brother-in-law?" I looked her straight in the eye. If I hadn't heard those words that day, maybe today I would be like many people here, thinking that Owen was just an impulsive kid in a tight spot. But no, Mom. He knew what he was doing. He even knew for sure that someone would save him. My voice wasn't loud, but every word was so clear that even I felt cold. I put the phone on the table, my hands clenched. What is making this family suffer is not me. Not because I was sick on Christmas, and not because I left with my husband when I was thrown out. What is making this family suffer is the person who keeps tolerating wrongdoing, who calls that protection love, and who forces others to bear the consequences as a family bond. As the last sentence ended, Eleanor swayed, grabbing a chair for support. For the first time, in front of all the relatives, she was out of words to scold me. Caleb stood beside me. After a long silence, he finally spoke. His voice was hoarse but firm. "From now on, anyone who still says my wife is the cause of the problems in this house, feel free to listen to that recording again. I will not let Eliza be blamed even one more time." No one answered. In a room that had been filled with accusations against me, the silence was the clearest admission of all. And I knew that from that moment on, the label of bad luck daughter-in-law that Eleanor had tried to pin on me was finally torn apart by the voice of her own beloved son. After the recording was played, everyone thought the problem was clear. Owen was the culprit, Eleanor was the one who covered for him, and Caleb and I were just victims dragged into a mess we didn't create. But life often doesn't stop at the point where you think you've hit bottom. There are holes that look knee-deep, but only when you step in do you realize there's a cliff below. On the afternoon of the second day after Christmas, as we were still trying to sort through all the papers on the table, we suddenly heard a car stop at the gate. It wasn't the noisy sound of a relative's car, nor the hurried steps of a debt collector. It was the sound of a car stopping quietly. A woman in her 50s got out. She wore a dark brown dress, her hair in a low bun. Her face was stern but not unkind. In her hands, she carried a thick stack of folders, tied with a rubber band. The first person to recognize her was Eleanor. The moment she saw the woman, my mother-in-law's face changed. She stood up, her voice stammering, "Sharon, why are you here?" The woman named Sharon didn't answer right away. She walked in, looked around at me, Caleb, and the few remaining relatives, then her gaze settled on the pile of debt letters on the table. Her expression was not one of surprise, as if she had expected this house to end up like this sooner or later. Caleb stood up politely. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Who are you looking for?" Sharon looked at him for a long time, then asked, "You're Caleb, right?" Caleb nodded. Sharon placed the stack of folders on the table. Her voice was very calm. "I came here looking for you. I'm not one of Owen's debt collectors, nor am I a victim of his car scam. But if I don't speak up today, your mother might continue to hide half the truth." That sentence made the recently calmed atmosphere tense up again. Eleanor quickly approached and pulled Sharon's hand. "Sharon, my house is in chaos today. Whatever it is, can we talk about it after the holidays?" Sharon pulled her hand away gently but firmly. "I've postponed it too many times, Eleanor. Every time I warned you, you always said, after the holidays, after the memorial, after Owen gets a job. But look around you. Is there another after left?" My mother-in-law froze. Caleb frowned, his voice slowing. "Ma'am, could you please explain to me?" Sharon opened her folders. One by one, she laid out the papers on the table, so neatly it felt cold. There were photocopies of loan agreements, proofs of transfer, handwritten statements, and even some debt notes where the signature at the bottom wasn't just Owen's. I glanced over and saw Eleanor's name on many of the pages. Sharon said, "A few years ago, I acted as an intermediary for loan sharks among old business owners. At first, Eleanor came to borrow a few tens of thousands, saying it was to cover a bank loan. I felt sorry for her since we'd known each other a long time, so I helped. After that, Owen started borrowing on his own, with his mother as the guarantor. Every time he was about to default, Eleanor would come back, begging for an extension, borrowing new money to cover old debt." She paused, looking straight at Caleb. "The $150,000 you're talking about is just from the car scam. But the total revolving loans, the high-interest personal loans, the money borrowed from acquaintances, plus the accumulating interest, it's already over $500,000. The air in the room seemed to freeze. $500,000. The number fell in the middle of the holiday like a bolt of lightning. I saw Caleb take half a step back, his hand gripping the table. Eleanor trembled, her lips pale, but she still tried to argue. "No, it's not that much. You miscalculated. I've paid some of it back." Sharon nodded, her voice not rising, but every word was sharp. "Yes, some was paid back, but with new loans. You plugged a hole here, but dug another one there. You thought you were saving your son, but you were just dragging more people into the problem." Caleb picked up a piece of paper. On it was his mother's signature with a statement guaranteeing payment if Owen failed to pay. He stared at the paper for a long time, then asked, "Did you really sign all of this, Mom?" Eleanor didn't answer. Her silence was heavier than any confession. Caleb turned to Sharon, his voice hoarse. "Did you ever tell my mother about this before?" Sharon sighed. "More than once. I came to this house, called Eleanor outside to talk. I told her to stop, to bring Owen to turn himself in, or at least be honest with the family. But every time, she would cry, always saying the important thing was that her son didn't go to prison. She was afraid of losing face, afraid relatives would find out, afraid people would say her family had a delinquent son. But the more she was afraid, the more she covered it up. The more she covered it up, the deeper Owen sank." I turned to my mother-in-law. She could no longer scold anyone. Her face was wrinkled, her hands twisting the hem of her dress as if trying to tear herself apart. It was only then that I understood why she had called us like a madwoman on the second day after Christmas. It wasn't just because Owen was taken by the police, not just because of the debt collectors, but because the secret she had buried for years was finally being exposed by an outsider, right in front of everyone. Sharon took out one last piece of paper and placed it in front of Caleb. "I didn't come here to force you to pay. I know it's not your responsibility if you didn't co-sign or act as a guarantor. I came so you would know where your mother stands now, and so she doesn't keep using the family name to drag you down with her. If you want to help someone, you must first see the truth." That sentence made me catch my breath. An outsider understood the boundaries better than someone inside this very house. Caleb held the paper, his hand trembling slightly. He looked at his mother, his eyes red. "Mom, I thought you were Owen's victim. But it turns out you weren't just deceived by him, you helped him deceive everyone else." Eleanor cried, but this time her tears no longer moved anyone. It was like the sound of a mother's devastation, forced to see the very mistake she had raised herself. I stood beside Caleb, placing my hand lightly on his arm. Not to stop his pain, because that was impossible, but to remind him that the pain should not turn into another wrong decision. In the living room, those papers lay scattered on the table like shards of what was once the respectable family Eleanor had been so proud of. And I understood that from the moment Sharon walked in, everything had changed. This was no longer about saving Owen or not, but about how this entire family could stop lying before they were all dragged into the abyss. Once Sharon left, the living room felt empty. The papers she left behind were still on the table, neat, cold, and needing no more words of accusation. Eleanor sat slumped in her chair, her eyes vacant. The few remaining relatives no longer dared to judge. Everyone realized this problem went far beyond a delinquent youngest son's debt. It was the fruit of years of concealment, years of using a mother's tears to cover her son's mistakes. Eleanor murmured, as if to herself, "I just wanted to help your brother. I just wanted him to have a way out." Her voice was so faint that if the room hadn't been silent, no one would have heard. Caleb stood before his mother, his eyes red. I knew he loved her. No matter how cruel she had been to me, she was still the woman who gave birth to him, who raised him alone after his father passed away. But love doesn't mean turning a blind eye, and some truths become more painful the more they are avoided. Caleb slowly sat down in front of his mother. He no longer shouted or slammed the table. His anger had subsided, leaving only a very deep wound. He said, "Mom, helping once is love. But helping to the point of covering up a mistake as if it were right, that's not love anymore. That's destroying him." Eleanor lifted her head to look at her son, tears streaming down her cheeks. She was about to argue, but her lips trembled without a sound. For the first time, Caleb's words weren't to blame her, but like a mirror placed before her. I stood by the cabinet, holding on lightly for balance. My body was still weak, but my mind was crystal clear. If I had joined in blaming her then, bringing up how she threw me out on Christmas Eve, perhaps no one would have blamed me. But I understood that scolding a panicked person only makes them more defensive. To solve this, she had to stop hiding behind her tears. I said quietly to Caleb, "Honey, let's step outside for a minute." He looked at me with surprise, then nodded. We went out to the side yard. The day after Christmas breeze felt cold. Caleb stood silently, his hands clasped. His voice was hoarse. "I don't know what to do anymore, Eliza. If I abandon her, I can't bear it. But if I let her drag me down, I'm afraid I'll make another mistake." I looked at him, seeing the exhaustion of a son caught between duty and truth. I said softly, "We won't abandon her. But we also won't sell our house, won't go into debt, and won't sign any papers to pay for Owen's mistakes. You have to be able to distinguish between helping your mother out of her panic and helping her run from the consequences." Caleb looked at me for a long time. Those words were perhaps what he needed to hear to protect himself. I continued, "If you give in now and sell the house, the problem won't be solved. Owen will learn that no matter how big a mess he makes, his older brother will always be there to cover for him. Your mother will learn that if she cries long enough, we will eventually give in. And what about the victims? Their money is gone, their trust is broken. We can't help our family by trampling on justice for others." Caleb looked down, took a deep breath, and then nodded. "I understand. This time, it has to be right. Even if it hurts." I held his hand. "Right doesn't mean cruel. We will still find a lawyer, still protect Mom's legal rights, and still guide Owen to give a statement if he's willing to cooperate. But whoever's mistake it is, let that person bear it." When we returned to the living room, Eleanor was still sitting there, her eyes swollen. Caleb pulled up a chair, gathered all the papers into a neat pile, and said, "Mom, I am not selling the house, and I am not transferring money to anyone as long as this issue isn't clear. But I will not abandon you. If you truly want to help Owen, we have to follow 3 conditions." Eleanor lifted her head, her gaze hopeful yet wary. "What conditions?" Caleb looked at his mother, his voice clear. "First, you have to hand over every debt letter, guarantee, message, recording anything related to Owen. Not a single page can be hidden." She opened her mouth, but Caleb didn't give her a chance. "Second, Owen has to confess everything honestly. The extent of his involvement, he has to own his mistakes, especially since you co-signed additional papers." My mother-in-law began to tremble. "Are you trying to send your brother to prison?" Caleb looked her straight in the eye. "No, I'm trying to pull him out of the hole you've been covering up for too long. If he keeps lying and running, then he truly will have no way out." The room was silent. I saw an uncle nod slowly. Caleb continued. "Third, from now on, all matters must go through a lawyer and the authorities. No secret negotiations with loan sharks. No cash payments. No under-the-table agreements. And don't panic because of threats. Even if you're afraid of losing face, you have to bear it. Because if you keep being afraid of losing face, this family will lose everything." That last sentence made Eleanor bow her head deeply. I stepped forward and placed a glass of warm water in front of her. My voice was softer, but not weak. "If you still love Owen this time, don't help him with lies. Someone who is lost, if they are always given a way back, will never learn how to turn around." Eleanor looked at the glass of water, then at me. Her lips trembled, and tears flowed again. But this time, her crying was no longer to force her son to yield. It was like the cry of someone who, for the first time, understood that her own hands had helped push her child into the abyss. She covered her face and sobbed. "I was wrong. But I was afraid of losing him, Eliza. I was afraid of losing my son." I paused for a moment, then replied, "The more you're afraid of losing him, the more you have to let him face his mistakes. If we still cover for him this time, you won't just lose Owen. You will lose Caleb, and you will lose the last remaining piece in this family." Caleb stood beside me without a word, but his hand resting lightly on my shoulder was enough to explain everything. I knew he had chosen to face the problem not by turning his back on his mother, nor by blindly helping his brother, but by, for the first time, leading his entire family out of the shadow of lies that had enveloped them for too long. Late on the afternoon of the second day after Christmas, just as we were sorting through the documents Eleanor had handed over, we heard a car pull up to the gate. This time it wasn't a relative or Sharon returning. Two plainclothes officers arrived with a uniformed policeman from the local precinct. Behind them was Owen. The moment I saw my brother-in-law, the tension in the room returned. The man who had once casually chewed nuts while criticizing me for being sick now had disheveled hair, a gaunt face, and red eyes from lack of sleep. Owen was brought home to retrieve some documents related to his past transactions. As he stepped inside, his eyes darted around the room. When his gaze met Caleb's, he ran forward as if a drowning man had found a life raft. In front of everyone, Owen fell to his knees and hugged his brother's legs. His voice broke. "Caleb, please save me. I don't want to go to jail. I'm still young. Please, tell them I just have debts. I didn't scam anyone." Caleb bent down to lift Owen up, but I saw clearly that he no longer hugged his brother as he once might have. His hands rested only on Owen's shoulders, enough to make him stand, but without the unconditional protection of the past. He looked straight at his brother, his voice hoarse but calm. "I want to ask you one thing. In total, how many people did you take money from?" Owen avoided Caleb's gaze, wiped his nose, and stammered, "I don't remember exactly. I just borrowed money for a business venture. The cars were delayed. The customers were pushy, so my cash flow got stuck. I was planning to pay it back." Caleb cut him off. "I didn't ask for reasons. I asked how many people." Owen looked down, silent. His silence stretched on for so long that one of the officers had to remind him, "If you cooperate, the process will be easier. If you keep being evasive, we still have enough reports and transfer records to proceed." Just then, Sharon returned. It seemed she had been called to clarify some documents related to the informal loans. In her hand was a photocopied list of names. She placed it on the table and said curtly, "There are over 20 names here who have transferred money to Owen, either as down payments for cars or as capital for buying impounded vehicles. I don't have all the original documents, but most of the transactions have proof of transfer and chat logs." She flipped through the pages. So many names appeared. Some had transferred $5,000, others $10,000, and even one for $30,000. I stood beside her, my heart feeling cold. There was a factory worker who had saved for a full year to buy a small pickup truck for a delivery business. There was a young couple who had taken out a bank loan to buy a car for a ride-sharing business, hoping to increase their income for their child. There was a woman who owned a small diner who had transferred almost her entire life savings because she trusted Owen as a good acquaintance. They weren't just numbers on paper. They were real families, real sweat, and a Christmas they probably spent sleeplessly because their money was gone. I remembered Owen's face a few days ago as he lay on the sofa, complaining that I was taking too long to cook and laughing at everything as if life just required others to bear his burdens. It turned out that behind his arrogant demeanor, there were so many people he had dragged into hardship. This was no longer about my delinquent brother-in-law. no longer about a family debt that could be settled internally. This involved too many people. Seeing the list of names before him, Owen began to panic. He turned to Sharon and shouted, "You're making this up! I already said I'd pay it back. I didn't run away. They just came demanding it at Christmas." Sharon looked at him calmly. "They came demanding it because you made promises month after month. You used their money for gambling, and you told them it was for business. Even now, you still don't feel you're in the wrong." Cornered, Owen suddenly turned to his mother. His gaze was no longer pleading, but sharp, like a wounded animal. "Mom, say something. You were the one who told me to find more loans. You said Caleb has a house, has money, that he could definitely help. You even co-signed the loan papers. Why is everyone blaming me now?" That sentence was like a hard slap to Eleanor's face. She froze in her chair, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. I looked at her and felt an immense sense of sorrow. The son she had protected to the point of selling inherited land, hiding the truth from the entire family, cursing her daughter-in-law, and forcing her eldest son to sell his house, was now shamelessly using her as a shield. She stammered, "Owen, I did all of that for you." Owen laughed cynically, his voice laced with poison. "For me? Then save me now. What's the point of crying? If you can't help me, don't say you love me." Caleb stood silently, listening to his brother. I saw his eyes redden, but he didn't lose control. He stepped forward, standing between Owen and Eleanor, his voice deep. "A man who causes trouble, takes money from over 20 people, and then blames his own mother when he's questioned. Who else do you want to save you?" Owen opened his mouth to argue, but Caleb continued, "Mom was wrong to protect you, but you were the one who held the money. You were the one who made promises to people. You were the one who used that money for gambling. Stop pretending to be a little kid who was led astray." Owen gasped, his eyes wide. He looked around the room, realizing no one was on his side anymore, and then screamed, "Fine. If none of you will help me, I'll expose everything. I'll expose Mom for signing the loan papers, for selling the family land, for telling me to keep quiet so Caleb would handle it. Don't think anyone will get to live in peace." Hearing that, Eleanor collapsed, her hands clutching her chest. It was as if only then did she truly understand that the youngest son she had adored was ready to drag her down with him. No one in the room could say a word. Even the police officer standing beside him was momentarily silent, witnessing a mother and son airing their dirty laundry on a holiday. I stepped forward to support Eleanor, even though the wound in my heart from her words still stung. She gripped my wrist tightly, her hand ice cold. Her gaze no longer held hatred for me, only panic and devastation. Meanwhile, Owen stood there, his face pale, his breath still ragged, but his true nature was now so clear that no one could fool themselves into thinking he was just an innocent youngest son. That afternoon, as Owen was taken away again, Eleanor no longer ran after him crying as she had that morning. She just sat silently in her chair, staring toward the gate, her lips moving without a sound. Perhaps for the first time in her life, she understood that some children become broken, not from a lack of love, but from being loved the wrong way for too long. And the price of that wrong kind of love, in the end, would not just be paid by Owen. After Owen was taken away again, a chilling silence fell over the house. No one had the energy to blame each other anymore. No one had the appetite to wish each other a happy holiday. On the table, the cookies remained untouched, the tea had gone cold, and the smell of incense from the living room mixed with the scent of menthol oil, making the atmosphere even heavier. I had actually wanted to return to the hospital with Caleb right away, but the doctor said that if the fever didn't return, I could rest at home. So, Caleb took me to our old room to lie down for a while. We had only left that room less than 3 days ago, but it felt like a lifetime. In the middle of the night, I woke up with a dry throat. Caleb was asleep in the chair next to the bed, his hand still holding his phone, probably worried about an emergency call. I slowly sat up, put on a jacket, and went down to the kitchen for some water. The stairs were dark, the house silent, except for a yellow glow from the living room. I slowed my steps when I heard a very soft sobbing sound. Eleanor was sitting alone in front of the mantelpiece, where a photo of her late husband stood. Her hair was down, the gray strands clearly visible under the lamplight. It was as if she had aged a great deal overnight. She was hugging the photo frame, crying as she spoke as if confessing her sins. "My dear, I couldn't take care of this house. I failed to raise our children. I thought by loving him, I could save him. It turns out I destroyed him instead." I stood hidden behind the staircase, silent. For the first time, I didn't see her as the cruel mother-in-law who had cursed me as bad luck, who had thrown me out with a high fever. I just saw a mother who had failed because she had loved her child the wrong way. A woman who had spent her life guarding her pride, only to be broken in front of the mantelpiece she had once been so proud of. I didn't approach. There are moments of another's suffering where one simply needs to be silent and let them face it alone. On the morning of the third day after Christmas, the weather was overcast. I had just finished taking my medicine when Eleanor knocked on the bedroom door. The knock was very soft, unlike her usual habit of just walking in without permission. Caleb opened the door to see his mother standing outside with swollen eyes, clutching an old, paint-chipped metal box. She looked at me, then at Caleb, her voice hoarse. "Could you both come downstairs for a minute? There's something I need to discuss." In the living room, she placed the metal box on the table. The sound of the metal was heavy. She opened it. Inside was a stack of papers tied with rubber bands, several small notebooks, overdue credit card statements, documents showing she had drained her 401k retirement account, loan letters from relatives, and guarantee letters Owen had asked her to sign. She took them out one by one, laying them out neatly before us. Nothing was hidden anymore. No more defenses. No more, it was just a little like before. With a trembling voice, she said, "This is everything. What I remember, I've written in the book. What I don't remember, I've marked the lender's name to be asked. I will report everything. I will not force you to sell your house again." Caleb sat opposite her, silent for a long time. I saw his hands, resting on his knees, clench into fists. This was the first time his mother had acknowledged her responsibility in front of him, without using tears to force him, without using blood ties to drag him in. He asked quietly, "Mom, have you thought this through?" Eleanor nodded, fresh tears falling, but her voice was no longer panicked. "I thought about it all night. If I keep hiding it, not only will Owen be destroyed, but you, Eliza, and everyone he scammed will be dragged down too. I was wrong. I will bear my share of the blame." When she mentioned my name, she hesitated for a moment, then looked down. "Eliza, about Christmas Eve. I said things I shouldn't have. I'm not asking you to forget it now. I'm just asking for your permission to do this one right thing." I looked at her, my heart heavy. I couldn't say, "It's okay, Mom," because it wasn't okay. Her words that day still felt like a burn on my heart. But seeing the metal box on the table, seeing her bend down to pick up every sheet of her mistakes, I understood. At least she truly wanted to stop. I replied, "I won't stop you, Mom, but everything must be done correctly. You're giving this information to correct a mistake, not because of a fleeting emotion that you'll regret later." Just then, Eleanor's phone rang. It was a call from the police station where Owen was being held. She answered it and put it on speaker because her hands were shaking. As soon as he heard his mother was going to bring all the evidence, Owen's voice on the other end screamed, "Are you crazy? Are you trying to kill me? If you expose everything, how am I supposed to live?" Eleanor closed her eyes, tears streaming down, but this time she didn't panic. She held the phone with both hands, her voice trembling but clear. "No, I'm giving you a chance to be human again. If you keep doing wrong and are always protected, that's when you'll truly be dead." On the other end of the line, there was a moment of silence. Then Owen started cursing again, crying, and blaming his mother for abandoning him. Caleb moved to take the phone, but Eleanor shook her head. She ended the call herself and placed the phone on the table. I saw her shoulders shake, but her back remained straight. Perhaps saying those words to Owen was more painful than any insult from anyone else. But it was also the first time she had chosen what was right over what was easy. That same morning, Caleb contacted a lawyer, an acquaintance from his office. He didn't rush his mother to the police station in a state of panic, but took her to meet the lawyer first to organize all the documents. I went along, not to play the role of a kind-hearted daughter-in-law, nor to prove I was forgiving. I went to ensure everything was done correctly, that no one was forced to confess to more than their part, and that no one had the chance to continue blaming each other. The lawyer was a calm, middle-aged woman. After a brief look at the files, she explained clearly that Eleanor had a share of responsibility for signing guarantee letters, helping to borrow money, and concealing certain facts. But her willingness to voluntarily provide evidence and cooperate in tracing the flow of funds and the list of victims would be very important. The goal now was not to run from responsibility, but to clearly determine who did what, where the money went, which loans were legitimate, and which involved coercion or illegal practices. Eleanor sat and listened, her hands folded in her lap, occasionally nodding. The woman who was once so afraid of losing face that she threw out her sick daughter-in-law now sat before a lawyer, recounting every time she sold gold, pawned her savings, and borrowed from acquaintances to save Owen. Her voice sometimes broke, but she kept talking. Caleb sat beside his mother, no longer hugging her to comfort her as he might have before, but he always placed a glass of water in front of her whenever she choked up. This was his way of maintaining his duty, not protecting a mistake, but also not abandoning his mother alone amidst the consequences of her actions. That afternoon, as we left the lawyer's office to prepare to give a further statement, Eleanor walked more slowly than usual. She no longer spoke in a high voice, no longer adjusted her clothes to look fancy, no longer feared being seen in a state of weakness. She just hugged the old metal box to her chest, as if embracing the bitter truth she had long avoided. I walked behind her, looking at her back and understanding that some awakenings come very late. But if someone still dares to step out toward the light, then at least among the ruins of destruction, there is still a conscience that has not completely died. After Christmas, everything proceeded along the path it should have taken long ago. Owen was prosecuted for his actions. One by one, the victims submitted their proofs of transfer, conversations, and receipts to the authorities. Some were angry, some cried as they told how their life savings had vanished. Every time she heard a new story, Eleanor bowed her head deeper. Perhaps only then did she understand that Owen's mistakes hadn't just destroyed her own family. She had to sell her remaining personal assets to partially cover the losses. It wasn't enough to cover everything, but at least it was a part of the responsibility she could bear herself. Caleb made sure his mother wasn't threatened by loan sharks, and didn't leave her alone in her old age with a shaken mental state. He helped her deal with the lawyer, sorting out which debts were legitimate and which needed to be reported. But he kept his promise to me. He did not sell our house, did not take on new debt, and did not sign any documents to assume Owen's liabilities. One afternoon after finishing a meeting with the lawyer, Eleanor sat lost in thought in a corridor. She was thinner, her graying hair no longer neatly dyed as before. I looked at her for a moment, then asked, "Have you taken your blood pressure medication, Mom?" She looked up, surprised, as if she didn't expect me to remember that. I didn't say anything more, just called a cab to take her to the doctor for a checkup. In the car, we sat side by side in a long silence. Outside the window, the post-Christmas streets were quieter. Withered holiday decorations were being thrown away on the roadside. The red of Merry Christmas signs had faded. When the car stopped in front of the clinic, she suddenly said very quietly, "On Christmas Eve, I cursed you like that. Why are you still willing to take me to the doctor?" I looked at her thin, trembling hands in her lap. My heart no longer ached as it once did, but the scar was still there. I answered slowly, "I haven't forgotten, Mom. There are some words that, once heard, are remembered for a lifetime. But I don't want to become the same kind of person who hurt me." Eleanor turned her face to the window. I saw her shoulders tremble slightly. She didn't immediately apologize, nor did she make any grand statements. A moment later, she just nodded slowly, as if accepting that some mistakes cannot be erased with tears alone. From that day on, she never raised her voice at me again. Sometimes, out of old habit, she would start to say something critical, then stop herself. I knew changing someone at her age wasn't easy, but at least she was beginning to fear the cruelty of her own words. After that, we decided to move out and live separately. It wasn't because I wanted to sever Caleb's relationship with his mother, but because I understood that some distance is necessary to preserve the integrity of a relationship. Caleb told his mother one evening, very calmly, "I will always be your son. If you're sick, I will still take care of you. If you need reasonable help, I will still help. But Eliza is no longer a place for you to vent your anger. And our house is no longer a safe that can be emptied every time someone makes a mistake." Eleanor listened, then looked down for a long time. If this had happened in the past, she might have cursed him as an ungrateful son, crying while listing all she had done for him. But this time she just said, "I understand." 3 simple words, but for us, they carried more weight than any promise. Because it was the first time she wasn't fighting over who was right. Owen was no longer the lazy brother-in-law lounging on the sofa criticizing me. After going through the legal process, he had to face the consequences of his own actions. I didn't feel like I had won. Honestly, when a family has a member who gets in trouble with the law, there are no winners. The guilty party must pay the price, and those left behind must learn to live with a fracture that doesn't easily heal. Many nights, Caleb would sit lost in thought on our balcony. I didn't ask what he was thinking, just placed a warm cup of tea beside him. There is a sadness in a man that he doesn't speak, but the person beside him can feel it. The following Christmas, Eleanor sent a small poinsettia plant and a box of fruit to our house. They weren't expensive, just a few oranges arranged neatly. On top was a handwritten note, the script a little shaky. I don't expect you to forget, only hope that one day the wound won't hurt as much. I read the note over and over, then stored it in a drawer. I didn't call it total forgiveness, because the human heart is not a door that can be opened so easily. But I accepted those oranges as a sign that even hatred can be put down, little by little. After everything passed, I still think that Christmas was the most painful one of my life. I had a high fever, was thrown out of the house, and watched my husband's family be destroyed by long-buried secrets. But that Christmas was also what helped me hold on to the most important things: my health, my self-respect, and a husband who finally knew where he needed to stand.